Hi, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. It is awesome to see so many people logging in for this. This is a special presentation of Dario Argento's debut giallo thriller, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. The restoration of the film is courtesy of Arrow Films and the American Genre Film Archive. And this is presented by Fangoria's Colors of the Dark podcast. We're going to have a conversation to set up the film with Dr. Rebekah McKendry and Elric, Kane, the hosts of Colors of the Dark podcast. And we're going to be joined by Berg from the American Genre Film Archive, a good friend of the School of Cinematic Arts and the mastermind behind a lot of our giallo screenings that we did on campus in 2019. And then we'll screen the film live, which will run about 98 minutes. And then we'll come back and take questions from you guys and talk about the movie. So let's welcome everyone up.
Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
Ciao.
Oh, you got J&B going on?
It is Scottish whiskey. Luckily, it's Scotch, but I couldn't find J&B. It's harder to find now than you think.
We talk about J&B for 1 second because I listened to the podcast about giallos, and you listed the 5 key ingredients.
No. 5 elements.
The 5 elements. You did not mention that in every giallo, someone at some point picks up a bottle of J&B.
Yes.
Because I grew up, many months of my life in Italy, and no one has ever offered me J&B. Not once.
So a couple of weeks ago, I watched Bava's film Shock. And that one was hilarious because not only does she pull out a bottle of J&B, she literally unearths a case of it, puts it on the counter and starts putting the bottles in the cabinet. And I was like, that's like grocery shopping for her. But I did discover you can purchase J&B at Trader Joe's for some reason.
Yeah, I know. I've gotten it before. I mean, what I didn't know about J&B, I mean, because obviously we've all noticed the incredible placement of it. And some of these, Fifth Chord might be the ultimate ode to J&B. But I was watching that documentary about Europe.
First of the Scorpion's Tail.
Oh, that's okay. That's another one. That Eurocrime documentary on Amazon right now actually does talk about that they were making some of these movies so fast that they didn't even have time to get alcohol product placement. So they would put it in, shoot it in hopes to draw money later in hopes they could attract. And I was like, that's wild.
Wow. Well, for those of you who are tuning in and aren't as well versed in giallo films, these Italian films, and we'll kind of get into the history of them in a sec. Majority of them always had J&B as product placement, the liquor. And sometimes the characters, it's just kind of in the background. And sometimes it's very overt, like where there's an entire case being placed directly in front of the camera. So yeah, it's just kind of always there. So it's kind of become
a status. I think when you're in Italy, to not have an Italian product, to have a Scottish or a foreign product, all those films tend to be tend to be laying the tracks for the American urban yuppie thrillers, which means higher class people for the most part. A lot of it isn't middle class, right? Almost none of it is a middle class cinema.
It makes it cosmopolitan, right? It makes it feel,
very international. And obviously they're in a lot of different countries. Also, the casts are obviously from all different countries, so it kind of makes sense,
Yeah, and Elric and I actually talked about this on the show last week. How it's not even just so much that these films take it out of the middle class, but they also take it into this realm of artists. Like everyone in these films are musicians, painters, photographers, models. Like it's always this kind of like, I'm not even just, slightly above normal middle class. I have achieved this artistic thing. So it's like, it makes it seem very posh. It's like watching, a musician go through trauma.
Probably to avoid seeing day jobs. No one wants to see a day job. A giallo set in the office. No one wanted to see.
Boring. That's boring.
So I wanted to just ask Bret if there was anything you wanted to tee up in terms of AGFA or Arrow before we go too deep into the movie.
Well, Arrow is the label that's in the UK. They're kind of, I don't know, our panelists might agree that they're the Criterion Collection of horror, sort of, And they have worked with AGFA, which is the American Genre Film Archive, for a couple years now, and we represent their stuff theatrically. So anything that they have the rights to, if anyone wants to show in a theater, like Reanimator, Donnie Darko, Hills Have Eyes, Deep Red, or indeed Bird with the Crystal Plumage, you come to AGFA. And These screenings were part of our regular diet, me and Alex, for a couple years as we were experimenting with the AGFA catalog, often giving world theatrical premieres to some of these restorations, which I found really amusing. And I'm just so glad that we get to do this again here, because it's been some time. In fact, the show that we did right before lockdown might be the last movie I saw in a theater, which was Edge of the Axe, which is a recent Arrow restoration on the IMAX screen at USC. And we have a standing invitation to do Devil's Honey at some point.
I know.
Yes.
The world was robbed.
Yes. At some point, whenever the world will open back up, we will get The Devil's Honey in IMAX. Yeah. As it should be seen.
But on the plus side, it's given me a year to do saxophone lessons. And so I'm really in the zone when we get there in person. So
fantastic.
By the way, that wasn't sexual harassment, Beck. I'm sorry.
It was.
As soon as I say
saxophone or
as soon as I saxophone, you know, it's all crazy. But yeah, I mean, if you want to tee up a little about giallo, a little in giallo in general, obviously we did that a bit on the last episode, but how do you pronounce, Bret, what's the pronunciation for the paperbacks? Is it the company, was it Mondadori? Do you know?
Oh,
it's something like Mondadori. Okay, it's Mondadori. I just didn't know. Right, the yellow paperbacks. Really, it's just from the color itself of these paperbacks that gave them this kind of aesthetic.
Like airport books, you know?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, it was very much like, so most of these films were inspired by, I'll call it the Harlequin romance novels of like cop and detective films that were coming out at the time period. And you were seeing most of these. A lot of them were Italian, which is where the giallo title comes from. But we were also seeing them come out of France. And Elric, you said that there were even some coming out of Germany as well.
The actual crime films that have a lot of aesthetic similarities, even though they're all black and white for the most part, were the German crimi films, which are all Edgar Wallace, who's the original King Kong writer, had all these crime fictions. So that was like a whole movement. There's like literally probably 100 movies just from that. And you'll see a lot of that and things like Blood and Black Lights and stuff. I feel like the Italians brought like fashion and style and color and the camera as an active participant to the story. That's what gave it its own completely different flavor. But I'll tell you something I read today that really surprised me. A couple things. I mean, we were just talking off air before we started about Argento, because this is his first film, and this film is better than his next, 3 or 4.
It is.
That's what's interesting about it. And he comes out the gate with a film that's so well put together. But hearing that he really had no interest in directing at all, and he actually thought the director was an angry person who just yelled at people all the time, and he only was a writer. And I had been thinking about Argento for a long time after we did the all-nighter a couple years back at the New Bev, and I remember watching his early films going, wow, he was a really good writer at the start of his career, and then that is definitely not what you think about later on. And it's almost like before his ambitions as a director really kick in, he's actually a really good writer, and obviously writing for Leone and stuff. But as soon as the camera takes over, even though I'm thankful for it, because I think that's what his contribution to cinema is, like the pure cinema Hitchcock type of approach. It's just interesting. His writing really does take a backseat, and I don't think of him as a great writer.
And he actually does give up on the writing eventually. And we see like Luigi Cosi kind of step in and really kind of take over a lot of his writing, or they're writing together. And yeah, this one, from everything that I read, I've got to look it up. It was somebody else who was supposed to direct it like right up until the final throes. And then Terrence Young, that was it, was originally supposed to direct this.
And I think 2 Italian guys before that, and he was disgusted by all of them. He was just like, that person's going to ruin my movie. That person, because another thing, he like a lot of the French New Wave, he actually did do criticism. So he didn't think he was going to direct. His dad was a filmmaker. His mother was like a fashion photographer. And I remember when we met him in Texas Frightmare a couple of years ago for I think it was the 30th anniversary of Suspiria. We did the panel. Something he said a lot was that a lot of his eye was trained on looking at women's faces and the way clothes lay on their bodies from his mother. And he got so used to the angles and shape of faces. That was one of his draws as much as cinema was, and that just was, it was pretty interesting to see. So I guess he comes in, he starts writing some criticism, and then the story he told is that he was with Bertolucci, who he was friends with, and he had written a couple smaller films, but Leone, asked them to write Once Upon a Time in the West as part of the script.
That is the other poster on the wall.
Oh, brilliant.
I think it's maybe the best movie ever made. Like, it's easily my favorite Leone. And he said when he met Leone, he said 2 lines, and Leone hired him without knowing anything about his writing, and that Leone would, he said, this is just stuff I was reading in this amazing book this morning. If you haven't ever seen it, Alan Jones.
It's
definitely one of my favorites.
That is such, it's not a cheap tome, but it's worth it tome.
Yeah, but he just said that like everything that would come out of Leone's mouth would create visual images in your mind. He said everything he said what basically created dynamic like film language. And so Argento got so excited, and he said that Leone said, if in 2 lines I can kind of see inside what kind of person you are, and if you kind of buy into cinema enough. And he knew in a second him and Berlucci got the gig. And I you know how much of this stuff is lore. It's always fascinating. But what he did say is that Bava was not an influence, and that shocked me. Which
is shocking, because Bava historically is who we kind of credit for the birth of giallo, with the woman who knew too little, or and so they you know, we tend to kind of look at Bava and his first few films as that is where giallo comes from. And so it kind of, you know, goes from there. But the fact that he didn't pull influence from him,
or at least he claims. I mean, and he also came and helped direct parts of Inferno.
Girl Who Knew Too Much. Sorry,
in the evil films, or the evil eye, or yeah. But it is weird for him to say that, and I wonder if some of that's just, you know, because it's another Italian director. You don't want to, you know, always be like, he called him too Baroque or something. So.
Well, I will say that what this film did do, even though this was his first film, he ended up with kind of a perfect storm here. Because when you look at the other people who were his department heads, he ended up with Ennio Morricone doing his score, who goes on to do just absolutely, well, he'd already done amazing stuff by this time, but having him do the score, so you know the score is going to be epic. His cinematographer, we were actually just talking about, and literally while we've been on here, Phil from Fangoria, Phil, the editor of Fangoria, just texted me and like, you have to mention the cinematographer. And he went on to
Vittorio Storaro.
Yeah, Vittorio Storaro not only went on to do a ton of other giallo and Italian movies, but he did Apocalypse Now as well, and really kind of held his own.
And probably, I'm imagining,
really legendary.
Bertolucci connection, maybe, because I know he did things like Spider Stratagem and stuff. So maybe, but his visual work.
The Conformist, which is sort of the film he's really, I think, remembered for, in addition to Apocalypse Now. And all of that stuff happens right there in the 70s. So we're watching, like, Morricone had just gotten established with the Sergio Leone films, but would then go on to have this epic career. And I'm actually curious, we can talk about this later, Argento switching from Morricone to Goblin, if there's something that you guys know about how that transition happened.
I think it makes total sense, because I think his rejection, I don't know the answer, but I think that what he's saying about Bava and I feel like Ennio Morricone, if you look at the films of this period, is scoring so many of them, like just so many Poliziottacci, giallos, it's all over the place, that I think he is making a cut. I think he was always on the cutting edge of fashion and what could be hip. There's one thing about Dario, it's like he's a hip guy at this point, and I think he was looking for ways to also break from even Hitchcock, where Hitchcock even is maybe too formal for him. I think he wants the camera to like attack, and the camera to create a frenzy of feeling, not just a showing of it. And I wonder if a lot of that was, I mean, because you watch Suspiria, that first time is so dislocating. If it's your first Argento, right, it can be, that opening kind of sequence can be so, it's such an experience, because the music is being used as like the witches. It's being used to attack you, not just, it's not underscore, you know?
And giving an on-screen correction, the Phil that texted me about cinematographer was not Phil from Fangoria. It was Phil, USC cinematography teacher, who I used to teach with. And apparently I need to label last names on people because I have like 4 Phils in my phone.
Wait.
So there we go. Phil Schwartz,
it does make more sense for it to be a cinematographer.
I
have a Philip Brown and a Philip Schwartz.
It's Phil Schwartz. He still teaches at USC. Phil is, I think he's amazing. So yeah, what I love about Bird with a Crystal Plumage is that it has so much energy compared to a lot of the giallos that come before and after it, and even compared to the ones that Argento follows it up with. He's got the animal trilogy, and it starts with Bird with a Crystal Plumage, moves into Cat o' Nine Tails, and then it's got Four Flies on Grey Velvet, and they're all kind of very mixed. Like, they're 3 incredibly different films that are really only connected by the fact that they have an animal in the title. But out of all all of them, Bird with a Crystal Plumage, even though it's Argento's first film, it has so much energy. It has so much design and passion, and it just keeps moving. By the time he gets to Cat o' Nine Tails, it's a cool plot, but it definitely drags a lot more than you see with a lot of his other films. And so, yeah, there's so much frenetic energy happening in this one across the board.
And it's I think it's one of his best stories. I think the mystery and the story and the way things come together, we're not going to get into it beyond that, is one of the best of all the films he did. But it's less, even though it has got a lot of energy, I agree, and a lot of design, which probably a lot of that is also Vittorio. I do think it's much more controlled than where, once we get to Deep Red and Suspiria onwards, we're going almost a lot more experimental, right? He's taking a lot more leaps from that period on. And I think that's probably still the most exciting, arc of his career. But this, to me, as a movie, is just, I still kind of am a little blown away. This is his first feature, to be honest.
Yeah. And I will say before we go into it, because I'm actually seeing many of my students in there as well, who I know have not seen a lot of giallo films. These are very, because we were talking about how they kind of came from these novels, they are very formulaic in certain capacities, where you would always have detectives. We talked about how they were usually about artists, but then there were also smaller things like gloved hands, like black gloves will always be a strong part of giallo, where the killer is completely concealed except for hands with the black gloves on. Usually elaborate murder weapons becomes part of giallo films as well. Sometimes they just stab, but it's also a lot of kind of opportunistic murder of like, I'm beating you with this wild statue. And, they get really kind of crazy in that capacity as well. But these were, this was at a time in Italy where they had a lot of different genres going on. They had the Poliziotteschi films. They were doing a lot of horror as well, and mockbusters, which we talked about in our last screening. So it was all about kind of adhering to the formula, but still finding a way to be very artistic and creative within it.
And sexuality and fetishism.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, again, we won't spend any more time up front, but and you can listen to the last episode, but those are elements that I think really stood apart at this time. The way it's looking at sexual hangups, it's taking like some of the Freudian undercurrent of Hitchcock and putting it to the surface the way De Palma did as well, and just making it the story. It is.
Yeah. And this is definitely where we see what will eventually become the Americanized final girl start to churn, because you always have the female who is going to survive most of the film, who is kind of going to figure out the murder. Sometimes she's still very kind of subverted. She's still always a very oppressed character in these movies. She stays that way for quite a while. Still is in most movies. But that said, like, this is where we really kind of start to see that female character come onto her own as being like the one who will stay alive through most of the movies. And usually that's where a lot of the sexualization and kind of the physical and mental exploration of the fetishisms come out of.
Okay, so we have some trailers tonight, courtesy Arrow. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and screen the trailers, and then we'll go right into the movie. Just know that I have to access different files, so you'll see a little bit of that. Are we good to go? Do you guys feel good about this?
I love this movie. I'm going to watch this again, even though I just watched it a couple weeks ago. I'm excited to see it again. And
should we plug the trailers are for Arrow releases that are out now. One is a bonkers, maybe Exorcist riff, kind of. I would say pretty accurately as it was sued. And the other one ties into our next episode of Colors of the Dark, which is a slight Stephen King connection. Well,
and you're even teasing our next episode too. Nicely done.
If we survive that long.
I think we'll make it.
Yeah.
All right, so without further ado, let's watch some trailers and then The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and then we'll be back to talk about it. All right. Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to start taking a look at some of the questions that came in, and we have a cool way of doing things where we invite people over who have asked questions so that you can use your camera to ask it live if you want.
Yeah, we got some great questions. There's some really good ones in there. So yeah, first off, I loved seeing this again. It's what I was talking about before, the energy. Like this one just moves. There is no kind of lull in the action. It's just continuous through the whole thing, which just makes this really watchable. This one was actually super high grossing, not only in Italy, but also in America. And this is part of the reason that I think Argento was really able to continue his career. That even after, being a first-time director on this, the heavy success of this one in Italy, that it was so profitable, really allowed him to start calling the shots more and keep going as quickly as possible.
Sorry, I missed the start. I had to go to the bathroom after the movie, but I wasn't sure. Are we doing questions or are we gonna wax lyrical?
I was waxing lyrically, but I
think you guys should feel free to talk for a second while I look through the questions.
Okay. I don't know if, and I was answering some, so you might want to go to the answered as well as we're in there, just as we're going. But I did notice somebody talking about the Hitman in there, and me and Beck had just actually been talking about Reggie Nadler a little earlier, because he's also Barlow in Toby Hooper's Salem's Lot. He has a face that you can't really forget.
What is the other movie that he is in that we saw recently?
I know, I can't remember, because it was something you brought up and then I mentioned that. I can't recall what it was. But
yeah, it wasn't Amok. It wasn't
that one. I can't recall which one it was. But
oh my gosh, we've watched so much.
He's in a number of interesting films. I think he's in a Burt Reynolds film too. I saw recently. Again, but I would say also another, and we're not talking about the actors much. Apparently, Dario really didn't care for Tony Musante. He found him to be a narcissist, and kind of it actually, given this is his first film, it basically, and it makes a lot of sense, is he never really cared for actors, and he's very overt about that. He, after this interaction with Tony, he just basically never got very close to them. Obviously, Daria is different than his wife at the time, but he really kind of kept his distance and was not that interested. So kind of, and it is interesting to see that, that in some ways holds some of his work back, I think, in latter years, his disinterest in that. Same, similar things that Hitchcock's been accused of, that, which I don't really agree with in Hitchcock's case. But the other actress that I really wanted to bring up, though, is Suzy Kendall is really great in this. I find she really, I don't know, her energy that she brings into this, as the girlfriend, I find really refreshing and kind of sweet and funny. And she's also in a couple other really interesting ones. Somebody asked about a good double feature, and I thought Torso would be a good one. Yeah,
she is amazing in Torso, and Torso's functions a little bit differently as a giallo. It's quite possibly
slasher.
It functions. That's where we really start seeing kind of the bridge between slasher, but she functions as the final girl in that, and in this one as well.
Yeah, it's a little more overt, and she's also, if you can ever find it, it's my favorite film I've seen the last couple of years, like for the first time, called Darker Than Amber, and it's unfortunately still a real pain in the ass to find a copy, but and we watched a really beat up 16mm copy at the New Bev.
Yeah.
But she's really good in that. She gets to kind of play a double role in that, and so she's just one of those actors. She's in Spasmo as well. She pops up a bunch, and I just think she's maybe a little underrated of the some of the British actresses who are popping up in some of the Euro films. I find her to be very good.
Yeah, across the board, the acting was really tight in this, even if Argento was kind of put off by some of them. Some of the giallo films, the acting's always a little dry or disconnected. But this one, it was really tight. Like, it was compelling the whole way through.
And a scene that a grower, like, I feel like most Italian films will have a scene that is out of place, or the comedy doesn't translate completely, maybe to us. But the Mario Adorf scene with the paint, which is the painter, that one, first time I saw this movie, I was like, oh, this is the one scene that kind of ruins the movie. And now it becomes my favorite scene with every screening.
It's so weird.
But if you want to have the greatest experience of your life. No, it's just so gross. But the greatest experience you can have is if you want to watch something, the wildest thing you'll see is that guy in The Italian Connection, a Police Attache film where he is holding onto the front of a car that's going full speed, and he headbutts his way into the windscreen, just keeps headbutting. And it's one of those scenes where you're just watching, okay, that's cinema. That's as good as this stuff gets. And so I had forgotten he was the painter because he got a wig or whatever.
He's amazing in all of those Fernando de Leo films.
Yeah, he's a really good actor. He's a presence. I think it's really good. But I did one thing I was going to share with you guys, just because I found in that same book earlier today, where he talked about not being, Argento talked about not particularly being influenced by Bava, and how he thought he was a little too broke. He then went on to say, for me, because he actually said he really only discovered Bava when he was actually making Deep Red. So much later, he claims that's really when he met him. So he wasn't like a father figure in any of the stuff that's always being written about him. And he said it was actually really Hitchcock, Walt Disney, which makes sense for Suspiria, Fritz Lang, Val Luden, which makes a lot of sense to us.
Makes a lot of sense.
Jacques Tenier, which is basically the same. Fellini, so of course the Italian connect. And this was the one that actually really surprised me. He said the early experimental films of Andy Warhol, he really took them, even like the 24-hour stuff. He found out to be very electric and alive. And I think that maybe answers one of those earlier questions, which is about the style and maybe the use of Claudio Simonetti. He was on the cutting edge of like art. He wanted to see what was cool and popular and what was moving,
And I think that also makes a lot of sense within, and somebody was mentioning the statues and the production design. And I mean, Argento's production design lust kind of swells to a fever pitch once we get to Suspiria and Tenebrae and stuff like that. But we really start to see that kind of attention to that, the fact that the screen is art and you can design it however you want, and that production design is a great way to kind of stylize it. And we see it really starting to come in here with how some of the shots are being framed, and even the pops of color. I mean, there's only so much that you can do with like a urban flat, but even how they were creating the pops of color and the stuff with the shadows coming in through the lights on the floor with the grid work, there was still a lot going on that you could really see him starting to pay attention. And the statue, somebody wrote, one of the questions was, Argento really loves his statues. And that, I mean, that is Tenebrae to a thing, where every single time somebody walks in Tenebrae, you'll do this cutaway on a statue and you can immediately go, oh, somebody's going to die on that statue in like 10 minutes. It happens every time. But you see it in this, where you're starting to see these statues as cutaways, as kind of, they are his B-roll, but they're there really to just paint the screen. These works of arts that become the cutaways, that become the B-roll, they really are just as much mood and tone building as the actual plot going on.
Yeah, and again, exactly. And a lot of the things we're talking about, there was a really good answer, by the way, if somebody wants to read out at some point in the Q&A, where somebody answered us to answer the question about going for a Morricone to Goblin. There was an actual, a real answer there. But a similar question will be like him going from his cinematographer Storaro, which feels a little more classical in this, to going to Tivoli, who's the cinematographer, where he starts doing the much more experimental, the Suspiria, the work that is kind of what he's known for now. So I'd be curious to know a similar trajectory. I think he's also just kind of wanting to be with people who are willing to push it, which is it makes him quite an exciting. I don't think the word avant-garde is used enough to describe Dario Argento, but I think it should be. I think when you really think about how radical Suspiria is compared to things happening around it, it tells you something.
But you know what I did just think of, Elric? You mentioned his love of Hitchcock. And I know you you've quoted a number of times on our show, the Hitchcock quote of you shoot your murder scenes like love scenes and your love scenes like murder scenes.
Yeah.
And that is how you make a good tension or a good horror film or a good giallo in that capacity. And I feel like we really do see that coming through, where the love scenes they're bizarre. Like, what's up with the metronome he had go? Just bizarre.
Sometimes it's just for rhythm, keeping pace. Everyone needs something.
Just need a little help there.
Yeah.
But then, we've got these kind of off-putting sex scenes happening. And then the one where the guy's like still sitting there, there's like a lot going on with the sex scenes where none of them seem sexy in any capacity. None of them actually seem sensual. But instead, where we see the real craft coming in, where we feel the sensuality is in those murder scenes. That's where we get our close-ups. That's where we get tongues. That's where we get eyes, the things that we kind of associate with sensuality.
And actual penetration. Very obviously, right? The knife. And people are always saying that about Dario, and he's the first one to go, like, that's all bullshit. My knife's just a knife killing. I don't want it. It's not a penis. It's none of the, but once again, the artist isn't really in control of how we're going to take it, which is always fun. But yeah, I don't know. This one is, it's a really good story. I mean, obviously the ending's very much like Psycho, with the explanation, after the fact, after the high point. But this is pretty common in that period of film, I'd say.
I want to know if this is like what the first one, because it becomes a trope in giallo films, I saw it wrong. And this is actually the first one that I associate with that. It becomes a big point in Deep Red and a number of other giallos, the fact of I was witnessing the entire thing, but something was off in my memory, or I saw something weird, or something just sticks funny. And then throughout the course of it, you have the revelation of what that thing was. And this, I mean, he of course brings it back in Deep Red, but this is the first one that I associate with the I saw it wrong principle.
I have a feeling some of that is in the Krimi, those German films I was talking about, but definitely in Hitchcock, obviously. And I mean, something like Spellbound is literally that. It's just a whole movie about trying to remember, and it kind of feels very artificial. But Rear Window, so many of these films are taking it. But you're right. I think that does become one of the main tropes of these films. And they do it in a much more experimental, with quick flash. I love the little flash freeze frames in this one. I thought that was actually really interesting. And people were asking in the chat about De Palma, whether he was the first to kind of be influenced American directors to kind of show the influence of giallo, but obviously he's mostly in debt to Hitchcock, but by Dress to Kill it feels more like giallo. So I don't know the answer to that, but I do think he was aware of them and watching them and
De Palma was definitely very aware of the subgenre. I mean, black gloves, I mean, as soon as you put on a pair of black gloves, but
and a straight razor.
It was actually, though De Palma, I'd say, became kind of the most commercialized giallo influenced stateside director. I mean, there was lots. If you look at things like Eyes of a Stranger, which was around the same time period, there was a number of them. Elric and I actually made a list for our Patreon this month of a whole bunch of kind of really strong giallo infused state-sized movies that were coming out around the same time.
Yes, White of the Eye is our highest recommendation, especially the opening of that film.
Is that one released? I remember that.
Okay. Scream Factory ended up putting it out finally, like a couple years ago.
And we ended up on one of our last recent shows, we talked about even Deadly Messages, which is a made-for-TV movie from 1980, but it may as well be an Italian giallo film. I think it played on ABC, but as soon as you see the killer put on black gloves and the kill scene set up, it's a giallo film.
And it's all about mismemories and amnesias and identity stuff. It's actually a very cool little movie.
It is.
And it was the surprise to us that we mentioned on the show was we had just watched done Four Flies on Grey Velvet, and the lead of Four Flies was also in Deadly Messages, like 15 years later, and we had no clue.
And whereas he's kind of taxing in Four Flies, he's really good in Deadly Messages.
He got better. He became more compelling after working with Argento. Maybe that was his issue at that point, but I don't know. But yeah, I mean, let's answer some questions, and maybe I'll open up other parts of the movie.
Reggie Nadler, that was it. Dracula's Dog. I watched Dracula's Dog. I can't remember what the name of the dog was, but I watched that a couple.
You're not allowed to say why. Because it's for a different podcast.
Oh, you're right. I did watch that for a different podcast.
That hasn't come out yet.
It's coming soon. It hasn't come out yet, but I did watch Dracula's Dog, which is why
that's where the conversation was.
Been talking about Reggie Nadler. Thank you.
That's funny.
Which was just a trip in general. So, okay. Let's dig in on some questions here.
There's so much coming in through the Q&A that it's starting to be hard to follow. But I'd love to call on James Sietsema to start, and then if you guys want to pick a few, we can put a running order. Is that good?
Definitely. Yeah, I actually saw a couple of questions by James Sietsema. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing that. That I would love to talk about. Yeah.
So James, I'm going to move you over, and just for everyone else that asked questions, we'll bring you over as panelists. And if you'd like to turn on your video, that'd be great. If not, just use your microphone and ask your question. Okay, so because this does take a second, I sometimes will also bring a few people over to keep their cameras off so that we can get to them pretty quickly. So I'll put a little bit of a running order, and feel free to put in the chat if there's anyone you guys want to call on.
Well, I feel like I need to call on Phil Schwartz as well, because he works here, and I got his identity wrong at the beginning. I had him misidentified. So yeah, and he has a good question about kind of the formulaic female. So yeah.
Hey James.
Hey James,
Hi.
How are you doing?
Oh my God, I'm doing so good. am so excited to be here right now.
Oh my gosh, we're excited to have you. You
this
asked
is
really good
amazing.
questions. Where are you at in the world?
Malta, Illinois. It is a village, technically, out of DeKalb.
Fantastic. Oh my gosh, that is awesome. Well, thank you. I know it's a little bit later where you are, so thank you for staying up with us.
Oh yeah, of course.
So you had a couple of questions. Feel free, fire away.
I I don't even know where to start.
Well, I can start with one of yours that I thought was really fascinating. Is you asked if a giallo film was made today, would it still kind of have the same resonance?
Yeah,
and actually,
there is a movie called Giallo, right? Like
written by a friend of ours.
And that, yeah, okay, so yeah, like,
but it got changed. The actor who got cast decided he needed to play a double role, which was not what the script was actually meant to be. It was going to be Vincent Gallo and Ray Liotta, and then somehow it just became just one actor, and he did both roles, and it's
So there are
Ray
some.
Liotta.
Yeah.
I know.
Could have been great. So we do still see some giallo films. I'll say giallo influenced and inspired and infused films being made today. Actually, one of Elric and mine's favorite films from 2 years ago. I've lost track of time. I haven't taken sweatpants off in a year. I don't know what year it is anymore. But Knife Plus Heart is French, but it is a straight up giallo film. The one that just came out this year, which I admittedly have not seen yet, but actually Ryan Turek just texted me yesterday and told me I needed to see it immediately. Crystallize. Everybody is saying is a super close to giallo. We had probably the most like tongue-in-cheek one a couple of years ago. We had one called The Editor come out, and that one was not only kind of poking at giallos, it was directly kind of referencing them. There were parts of it that really worked. Elric, can you think of any others?
Well, yeah, I mean, Amer and Strange Color, My Body's Tears. But I think what all of those have in common is actually none of them are giallos. They're all films commenting or riffing on giallos. And so I think the question that is like, can you make a straight thriller with the style that people take it for what these movies felt like at the time versus a throwback? And I haven't seen anyone, as far as I can think, try.
Barbarian Sound Studio, I feel like was really going there.
Yeah, but
it definitely gets really.
But it's still homage to a different world. You know, he's still recreating the world, and they're making something like Suspiria. So what I mean is, like, to see one without a wink at all. I don't know. I haven't seen it. I'd love to see that, because I think there are things in this. I think all you need to do is make a scary movie. None of those that we just mentioned really work on that level of getting under your skin scary. But if you could make something as intense as like
Knife Plus Heart, give it some credit.
A little, but you're always in the style of it. That is the most original of them, I think, because it's still giving its own spin on it. And I think, but I do think overall, I have yet to see one where I'd go, and maybe it's just very hard when you have a whole history of that, cinema, because if you put J&B in black gloves and a knife, it's hard not to wink. But I think it's possible. I think somebody could make something that's still really intense that you feel in the way you might have felt discovering these. But it's certainly good. I mean, De Palma's probably the one who was doing it most recently,
De Palma's Passion is a perfect example of a movie currently, or, in the last 10 years, which might feel more like a giallo than something like Amer.
Yeah, and his feels more like that than the one he was remaking. I mean,
you were so right.
He remade it right like a year later from the French film that he was remaking, and his feels more like a giallo than the thing he remade. So that's a good call.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, did you have another question? I saw you post a couple times in the
Q&A. Sorry, I felt so bad because this is my first time viewing this film, but at the same time, I just wanted to get my questions out there.
Oh my gosh,
I had them.
Well, if you're new to giallo, sorry, just gonna say, if you're new to giallo, don't think they're all just like this. They're not all just investigative murder. Like, we've been highlighting some that are a bit more cut from the Le Diabolique or Repulsion type mold, like a person kind of learning something about themselves, slowly going mad. And some of those have a very different feel, a lot more psychological than just the investigative kind of mystery.
Okay.
Yeah, so like even the one that. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
That's what I've been kind of leaning towards lately, is like the the kind of descent into like madness almost. You know,
So-
like I love the like mystery of everything, but I don't know why it's the really dark, just weird stuff that I'm for some reason lately have been just getting into.
Check out Fulci's The Psychic is really good
Okay.
in that capacity. I'd also recommend Fulci's Lizard in a Woman's Skin.
You brought
And,
that up on the last colors of the dark. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of my faves. I actually tried to get it on our Fulci draft that we did for the Screen Drafts episode, and Elric fucking vetoed me. So lame.
He just
I had
shook
to.
his
So
head
lame.
to it.
I know.
No,
what
I
the
like that
hell?
movie a lot, but there's still better. But for me, it's Perfume of the Woman in Black.
Mhm.
Okay.
Is anything with Mimsy Farm, the actress. She seems to descend into madness in every one of the films she's in, but she's really good. That one I thought was particularly striking. I only saw it this year for the first time myself. It's
Even
really
our
good.
namesake, All the Colors of the Dark, which we loved so much, we named the show after, definitely, has that descent into madness.
And cults.
I wanted to watch that the other night, but I'm not gonna lie, I had a couple too many drinks, so I'm like, I'm gonna hold this off.
It's trippy. I wouldn't
another
watch
night.
that one while you're a little in different states. It's real trippy. It's
Unless
very
it's
much.
JB.
Yeah, unless it's J&B, and then go for it.
There you go.
Well, thank you so much, James.
Of course, thank you so much for having me on. This was a complete shock. I didn't know how it all worked, so I was just excited when Elric answered my my double feature question. So thank you so much.
What did you double feature this with?
Torso.
Good choice.
Shoot.
Or Tenebrae.
Tenebrae, definitely. Yeah.
Tenebrae, yeah.
But that's a nice first and last kind of feel. Even though
It
Tenebrae's
is.
not the last, it feels kind of like the last of that cycle.
Tenebrae is his, all but say it's Argento's most polished giallo
It's great.
film.
It's a great movie.
Okay.
It's brilliant. Yeah, it is
Yeah.
absolutely brilliant.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. This
Thank
has been
you,
fantastic.
James.
I really appreciate it.
Take care, James.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Okay, so we have Phil queued up.
Hey, Phil, how are you doing?
Oh, Rebekah, it is so good to see you.
It is good to see you too.
I
Oh my gosh.
I miss teaching with you and browbeating those undergraduates.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like we do, man.
Oh,
Maybe
man.
they'll put us together some summer again. That was a
Well,
trip.
I'll work on that. But so as I said in my question, this was my absolutely first dipping my toe in the waters of the giallo genre. That's a tongue twister. So I guess at one time it would have been called campy. Perhaps that adjective could have been applied, years or decades ago. I'm dating myself, but I think I would have enjoyed it just a tad. I mean, I loved the photography. I loved the production design. I was actually catching a couple of compositions that I recognized from The Conformist of all remarkable movies,
That's
which is like my number one top
Same
film
cinematography,
in my
yeah.
life. But I think for me as a film person and a teacher, I would have enjoyed it a bit more. Even with the campy flavor of it, had the women's roles been slightly more, for lack of a better pun, fleshed out.
So
That's
that's
my observation.
So that was definitely a huge part of giallo films. And I mean, there are some
Italy.
giallo films. Italy.
Italian culture in the
Italian
70s.
cinema in the
Jeez.
70s. Because
What
I do
woman's
have to
roles?
It's not
blame it on
even
Italy.
just
Blame it on
these.
Italy.
yeah, you see it in a lot of, and I mean, not that was Italy at the time, but it was what we
Right.
were seeing in a lot of their more genre-driven films. Things like even the Policia Tetsky films, which functioned very differently, still had the same kind of female roles. Even their spaghetti westerns, you still see females in these very kind of
Right.
But at
stagnant
least
roles.
women make it into giallos. I think those other roles, they're almost only in it. They're literally objects in the police films and barely in West. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
never leads. They don't even really show wives. They're literally usually victims being shot at or abused. But at least in giallo, in some ways, there's a killer who's a woman in this, which is at least interesting and we have a few who really become the dominant faces of the genre, from Edwig,
Edwig
Barbara
Finnick.
Boucher, and people
Yeah,
like
Barbara
that.
Boucher. Yeah,
And I think Dario Nicolodi becomes, you're right though, in terms of agency, there isn't a lot, but when you get to Dario Nicolodi in Argento, who became a creative partner of his and co-wrote Suspiria, and she's in Tenebrae and Deep Red, she, to me, actually is in all those films shows the kind of character you're probably looking for, you know, a little His Girl Friday-ish.
Do you think it would be worth my while if I want to learn a bit more, to explore a bit more, to watch Suspiria? I've only seen little pieces of it.
I always show it the first day of class.
I know, looking at the photography.
I mean, yes, I think so. And I think the other thing, when you say camp, I think some of that is coming from the dubbing.
Yeah, the dubbing always causes a disconnect.
Yes, of course. The dubbing drives me crazy. I'd much rather be dealing with subtitles.
You get used to, you do get used to it with the Italian films, though. Yeah,
Suspiria. Yeah, we ran a debate before we decided to go English, and I will say that with Suspiria, there is a really strong disconnect that you're going to have, because some of those actors in Suspiria, what they did was they would have the Italian actors say it phonetically in English. And then so they could kind of get the mouthing correct. Then they would bring it over here, dub it. But because of that, the inflections are off. Like when the person is emoting physically is not the same as when they might be emoting vocally. And so there is this weird disconnect that always happens with
There's sometimes counting. There's one person speaking English and the other person.
I've heard about that.
10, 9, 8, 7. You're just like, oh my God. But I think as somebody interested in cinematography, Suspiria was doing things with light where the lights were so hot and so bright. You couldn't even directly cast them on the actors. So everything in that film is actually being reflected off a mirror system that they had to create just for that movie. And you read about it, and it is one of the most complex lighting setups in any movie.
Seriously, well, I'm definitely going to investigate that.
Yeah, I think you get excited about the process of it. You know.
Yeah, cinematography wise, I would also encourage Tenebrae.
How do you spell that?
Tenebrae. Tenebrae.
Tenebrae. It almost sounds Scottish.
Yeah, and also if you do dig Suspiria, I have to say Inferno is Inferno. And actually cinematography wise, opera. Like opera is beautiful.
Okay, great. Fabulous. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Phil. I hope you're having an awesome
totally off
semester.
the wall.
We're just getting started with Off the Wall, I hope.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
As long as Bret and Agatha are still in it, it could get a lot crazier than this movie.
Yeah, this was a classy one. We figured that since we had done Burial Ground and Cruel Jaws, that we needed to class it up a little bit. So we went Argento for this one.
Great.
So thank you so much, Phil.
Thanks, Rebekah. Stay well. Best to your family.
Thanks, yours too. Hopefully I'll see you soon on campus.
Hope so.
Okay, we should have Jack Young.
Hello.
Hey, Jack.
Hey guys, this is dope.
Where are you coming from?
Boston, Massachusetts.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for staying up so late with us.
But I have some J&B keeping me company.
So nice.
Heck yeah, you knew what you were getting into. I love it.
J&B and Duncan's, love it.
And a really good sweater. That's all you need.
Oh, thank you. I'm channeling my inner Lebowski.
You could be in your own giallo film right now with that. So yeah.
So I started getting into giallo films in like November of last year, and I've just been binging them ever since. So this was sick. You guys have done a great job. I wanted to talk about one of you mentioned earlier, the weaponization of the camera in giallo films and in Argento films in general. Mm-hmm. And this film definitely has, you see it with whether the camera is backing someone into a corner, or in particular, the razor blade kill stood out to me as a really violent use of cinematography. And I wanted to ask, what were your favorite kills in Argento films where where the cinematography comes into mind?
Actually, for that one, I'm going to go back and cite a film that predecessed this only by a year. So I don't think it influenced it that heavily. But the first time I remember seeing kind of the camera used as the weapon is in Peeping Tom from 1969. Not a giallo film in any capacity, but if you're looking for really good examples of kind of the camera being the force. That's just some brilliant camera work in that one. But yeah, Suspiria always sticks with me because in Suspiria, a lot of times we see things getting backed up. And then only if the camera chooses do we actually see what's doing it. And so we'll see characters like backing themselves up into razor wire. And then after we've been watching that for a couple of seconds, it'll turn around and we'll see the reanimated dead roommate and things like that. But yeah, it's phenomenal.
I mean,
stuff.
there's so many. I mean, Tenebrae definitely is the one that comes to mind. Some of the one where it cuts through the white piece of clothing, and you just, it's the thing is in American films when they take a POV shot, they go too far and keep it in POV to the point where it's that absurdity of like, now I'm shaking your hand, like Lady in the Lake type stuff, and it takes you out. But if you can mix that shot into the language, so you're not like held just into the point of view. I mean, obviously in slasher films, it's usually they do the same thing that this film's doing, like hiding behind a tree, Jason's heavy breathing, right? But it feels to me that's a very limited use of that POV, whereas in this, it's pretty fluid, I guess is the word I'd use, where it can go from the regular shot coverage to something that will have the hand holding something or placing it down, like the part where she has to actually turn to place something away, and then when she looks back, the killer's in the door frame, right? That kind of use of it to me is super effective. In the same way that found footage uses a camera to basically keep us off guard from what's going to jump out, right? It's a first person camera. I love the use of it in Argento. I don't think it extends to all giallo though. I think Argento is very unique in the way he uses it.
Yeah, actually, I can't remember scenes of that. I can remember a few other, but yeah, like not as much. Like it's definitely used, or I'd say that the POV shots are used a lot in like All the Colors of the Dark. But I can't remember it in many other films past that. So yeah.
And I stick to Suspiria not being giallo. It has.
Yeah, we've argued this before. I think that I tend to have kind of more of like a genre fluidity. But Elric is very much like,
no, I mean, it has giallo sequences, totally. I mean, it's got the black covers and the thing, but I just view it as like if something's supernatural to me and can't happen in real life, like the true crime angle, in my mind, it becomes a different genre.
What about the psychic?
I don't know if that's supernatural or not. I don't know if I don't view supernatural. I'm thinking like ghosts, witches, ghouls, psychic phenomena I view as still possible. I don't know. Why am I being grilled about whether psychic behavior is correct?
Because I'm now going to go lizard in a woman's skin, where she literally dreams what she's later about to see, and then she's able to use her dream to discern.
I've done that. I've had premonitory dreams. Who hasn't? Come on. It's all real. But again, it doesn't matter.
We also argue a lot about stage fright, which is in 1988. Soavi does stage fright. Yeah. That one, that's another that we argue if it's a giallo or not. I consider it giallo, and you always say it's a slasher.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that's made that's like a slasher in Italy gets called a giallo because it's part of a movement. But that other difference there we talked about a little on our last show is that I think if there's an escaped killer who's on the run, that to me usually tends to be much more like American slasher movies than a giallo tends to be a crime, part of a crime concept to inherit money, to make somebody crazy. Not always, obviously, but the majority of them are. Yeah, who cares? It's a great movie, so I didn't veto that one back in the day.
No, you let me put stage fright on there.
Because it's a great movie.
I remember that argument. If somebody, James, you had asked like, can we get modern day versions? Stage fright is not modern. It's 1988. But if you're looking for kind of one that feels really contemporary, like what were they doing? You have to think that's like 20 years after Bird with a Crystal Plumage. Like where does the giallo go to from that point? Stage fright is beautiful.
And flat out the best thing, we just talked about it on our Patreon thing, but a film I just found recently called Eyes of Crystal, different than the thing she was just talking about, called Crystal Eyes. Eyes of Crystal's from 2005 in Spain, Italy, and it just feels like watching a flat out intense Seven-like giallo shot like very recently, and it's really messed up, like really gory, but it feels like a David Fincher giallo basically.
Eyes of Crystal.
Eyes of Crystal.
Yeah,
it's a hard one to find. I've been looking for it. Isn't it?
Somebody might have put it on YouTube though, so a good quality on there. So have a look. But it was a really entertaining. Some American movies like Night Moves is pretty, Christopher Lambert, but it still feels pretty much like a giallo.
There's another one that Elric and I love that I think I can't even remember what nationality it is. Mute Witness.
Yeah. It's in Russia, but
It's Russia. That's it. It's like a Russia American production. But yeah, it's another one that's like a really tight kind of updated giallo. It still feels it's got the exact same trappings.
Some of them, yeah. It's a fun one.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Jack.
Thank you,
Have
guys.
a great night.
Yeah.
Hey, Diana.
Hi.
Diana.
Yeah, it's Diana. So thank you for having me on. I am a huge fan of giallo movies. I mentioned in the Q&A that I have my own podcast where I discuss giallo films on a monthly basis, and it's called Giallo of the Month Club.
Fantastic. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I started out as a big fan of slasher movies, and I had only seen Bava and Argento and Fulci, and I kind of used the podcast as a way to explore some of the lesser known films, and make a little bit of a fun job out of it, do a little bit of research, look for some themes, social commentary, and dive a little bit deeper than just the surface.
Cool.
That's awesome. Very cool.
Yeah. And two things: Suspiria is not a giallo film.
Oh,
Stage Fright is a slasher.
I think I found my new co-host.
Genre fluid.
Actually, it'd be really boring. We would just
I will gladly be your co-host, but I am on East Coast time, so you just have to,
okay.
work it out.
There you go. Yeah.
We didn't ask where you are. Where are you at in the world?
I'm in Baltimore, Maryland.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so another East Coaster. My question was about the theme of this film, how it dealt with the unreliable eye and perception versus reality. I know Rebekah touched on this a little bit earlier after the film ended, but since perception versus reality, it's a recurring theme in Argento's film. Filmography, Deep Red, Tenebrae, we always get that a little bit of a twist. And I'm sure you've seen Crystal Plumage a bunch of times. So after all of these rewatches, do you still find that the twist is ingenious or inventive, since he does use it in a lot of his films? And I am also a fan of recommending double features outside of the Jolly Filone. So I would recommend for this film High Tension, Frailty, and Lost Highway if you're looking for a little bit of unreliable narrator.
I didn't know somebody was going to come on here and talk dirty to me. Because anyone who says Lost Highway to me is already like, oh, Lost Highway.
Yes. Well, I reviewed Crystal Plumage last year, so I already, had it in my head. But do you have any recommendations that would pair well with this film, since we do have quite a few listeners or watchers,
unreliable narrators. Let's see here. Where else do we get that? Like really heavily.
I do think High Tension was a good pick.
High Tension is a good pick. I'm trying to think narrators.
And also, I mean, not to put you on the spot, but yeah, do you find that the twist is still as smart as maybe the first time you saw the film?
Well, it obviously got done a lot since then. And so I kind of still look at this one as, this is one of the first times that it did it, that it kind of used that twist of the victim is the killer. And you see it later, but I still think that it was pretty clever. And it obviously shocked audiences at the time because it was so high grossing both in the US and the States. Like even Roger Ebert gave this film a good review and said that he was really appreciative of the twist and thought it was really cleverly done.
And there's so many red herrings in these movies that to be perfectly honest, watching this one again, it wasn't until about halfway through it, and I've seen it like 4 times, that I remembered, oh yeah, that's what it is. And Deep Red, it happens to me all the time. There's certain twists in the middle of Deep Red, not quite the final twist, that I always forget, oh, that's right. And Tenebrae has, an all-timer. So I think he's actually quite good at the reversal, but to do it exactly what you're saying, he needs lots of unreliable narrative, lots of red herrings for us to deliver. So if we went back and analyzed it beat to beat, some of that of course doesn't hold up nearly as well, but I don't think that's what his movies are about,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we get those flashes where you see the bird clue like repeatedly, and you don't realize until the last the third act, the very end of the film, that actually meant something and it was right there all along.
I do react every time to the one part about this movie that, I don't know psychologically how accurate or if this is, but that idea of the transference of that she identifies later with the victimizer and not the victim, and that's why she's doing it. And I find even if it's total BS psychology, it's still effective. Like it's a little unnerving, to hear that and kind of sad, It's,
Yeah.
High Tension strikes me as that's why it's a good pick, because High Tension might be a very similar.
Yeah, I would also on Unreliable Narrator, though it's an entirely different twist. Jacob's Ladder is probably my fave Unreliable Narrator. In that capacity, I would also say Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which has a similar twist. But yeah, they both kind of have that, here's the story, and no, that's not actually the story, presentation to them.
Awesome.
I'm no good at pairing, so I can't help you.
I
I need to sit and think.
Elric takes curation like that as an art form. Like he crafts entire shows around making double features.
Sometimes I can come. But I actually think yours were good. Those are all good. And those are kind of mindfuck movies too.
Yeah. And if you're ever looking for deep cut giallos, let us know. We can definitely recommend. Like we just did Footprints on the Moon, Amok. What was the one
actually, you know what? Footprint. Well, I don't want to give it away, but Footprints on the Moon has an element of that too. So you might want to look up for that one. It's a very, very good movie.
That's a hard one to find, but yeah, that's definitely. When I posted up the pic of it, a lot of people had seen it though. So apparently it's got some type of following in the cult space.
Yeah, I'll definitely move that up to the top of my list.
Excellent.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Yeah.
Okay, we should have William.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, William.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. So
fantastic.
Yeah. I've been getting into giallo for probably 9 months now, since like the pandemic started. I just started buying like a bunch of giallo, everything else. But I wanted to ask, what do you see the difference between like Argento and Fulci, like stylized, cinematography, the writing, stuff like that? I heard like Fulci really didn't like Argento's writing at all, or something like that. But what do y'all see about?
Yeah, Fulci and Argento were a little contentious, or so the legends go. But yeah, Fulci has a slightly different tropes. Like with Fulci, you always see a real strong focus on the eye. And that's not to say that Argento doesn't use eyes. But for Fulci, it usually becomes destruction of the eye, usually becomes a plot point in some capacity. Fulci is also a little bit more gore heavy. Even in his giallo films, they're always a little bit more intense. And Fulci, for me, it also comes down to plot. Like, honestly, this plot makes sense. I could follow it, and I was in, and I understood what the people were saying and what their motivations were. And we may have had super flat characters, but they still seemed cleverly motivated within the plot. Fulci's films, even the ones where he's trying to make plot, always feel like a fever dream. They always feel like they're existing in this other world where people are just kind of gliding through. And Fulci's protagonists, honestly, in some of his giallo films specifically, his protagonists kind of seem like the ones who say the least. Like they are just experiencing the world, and everyone around them is the one who is taking the action while they're just kind of moving through it. As the case in both The Psychic and Lizard in a Woman's Skin.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Fulci, I feel like always trying to go up there and like make you think like the protagonist or whatever might be the killer.
Oh yeah.
Not. Like, you know what I'm saying? There's always a sleight of hand on everything with Fulci and like his movies, especially in his giallos and stuff like that. And especially in his giallos. And like, yeah, you're right. Like most of Fulci stuff just never make any sense. Like, I mean, this is basically most of his movies, even going to like Beyond, like House of the Cemetery, stuff like that. And this is like it's like deep horror cut shit, but you know what I mean?
No, but I think they're like, look, I think about this way more than the humans are meant to. Like I literally walk on streets thinking about the difference between Fulci and Argento and what I like about them each. And
he's telling the truth.
One is like, I think of Argento as a scalpel and Fulci as a giant machete, and there's nothing subtle. Like if you're operating on a patient, he's bringing a machete, and Argento is bringing that scalpel, because I think one is fine and one is about film poetics and cinema language, and the other one is just pure blunt instrument abrasive, in your face, but also so atmospheric. Like
Yeah.
there is no one next. Maybe Lynch is the only other director who I find more atmospheric than Fulci. I find when Fulci gets it right, the sequences that he just concocts sometimes just have this feeling that's so dreamlike. And so I can see why that's less for everybody than Argento for the most part. But there's space for both. You know, it's
I mean, I was going to say also, like, you think it's something like with Fulci and like the New York Ripper, which everybody like, oh my God, that's like,
so extreme.
I like
so
how subtle it is.
It's extreme, but also the ending with like, I'm not going to tell the ending, but I don't know, like finding out that the murderer was, who it was and everything else. It like made like, you sympathetic, especially about, what he went through and everything, or the killer went through, you know what I'm saying?
Because
like,
everyone loves Disney and Donald Duck is a beloved character.
Yeah.
Like, who doesn't love Donald Duck? You feel so sad for him at the end. You're right. Who would have thought?
But I don't know. Yeah, that's what I feel about like Fulci. Like, is this really intense and stuff? And he's just like, I don't know. Seemed like he got a lot of like anger, like sometimes with his stuff.
No, actually, I think so. I think he says that in Cat the Brain, right? I mean, make you like that.
He points straight up says that he has a lot of anger, he has a lot of frustration, he had a lot of medical problems that really compromised, how he was feeling on a day-to-day basis and gave him this edge. And Fulci also started his career as a doctor. At times he even called himself Dr. Fulci, that I don't think he finished the medical degree.
So close to Fauci that you said that. I was like, oh, Dr. Fauci.
Dr. Fulci. No, I'm pretty sure that at times he actually like referred to himself as that. I remember it coming up at least once or twice.
Maybe that's like why, because he's like, sort of as a doctor, like you said, like maybe that's why he like always like showing so much like intestines and like body parts and everything else is spewing out with all this like and it looked like so real, and like the makeup effects in like all his movies are just great.
Well, if you have not seen Cat in the Brain, I recommend that one. Not that it's a great film, but it is definitely like a meta Fulci movie where he just wears this kind of Elmer Fudd costume and eats out a lot, but while he's having a salad, he'll sit there and mentally tell you about why he, stuck a shard of wood through somebody's eyeball. And then it'll replay the scene like 5 times. It's like the Fulci clip show. There's also a really good documentary that came out. I think it's out through 7 called Fake is Fulci or
Fake is Fulci.
Yeah.
I still haven't seen that.
It's good. It's got a lot of interesting stuff in it. So that's a good one to check out.
I think the main thing, William, is that Argento could never have made Devil's Honey, and that is the end of the argument.
Yeah.
With all his skills, he could never have made that film. So
it's true.
Never forget.
I still have to see that.
Trust me.
It's remarkable.
All right.
Thank you, William. Have a great night.
Thanks for bringing Fulci to our Argento show. I love it.
All right. You will.
Bye. Okay, we should have Ian. Let's do 2 more live ones, and then maybe a little bit of a lightning round. Since
we can go.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I love that we've had so many people stick around for the Q&A. This is remarkable.
By the way, just so people know, and I only figured this out. Hopefully, I'm allowed to say that, Alex. These are also taped and do exist now on like the back catalog. I think I've just started popping up on a channel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot to. I was going to put the links in, and I'll do that now to where you can see the Q&As that we did with Burial Ground and Cruel Jaws.
I saw it pop up a couple of days ago, and I was like, "Oh, this is really cool for people because that way, if somebody misses the show, they could always watch the film on their own time, and then check in with the Q&As."
Okay, so I'll go ahead and post those. And Ian, if you're with us, you're welcome to turn on your video mic.
Hey, I just wanted to thank you guys for doing this. This is one of the few of his early stuff that I hadn't seen before, so I was really excited to see it. And really quick, earlier when you were talking about Suspiria with the dubbing, that's actually like one of the things that I absolutely love about that movie, because it just adds to how weird and surreal and messed up that movie is.
Especially Udo Kier, right?
Mine's the character of Olga. Like I love how just strange she comes across because the dubbing is so smooth but yet the character is not the actual actress. And so it's this amazing disconnect. But I think that for me, Suspiria is the one film of Argento's that has that dreamlike quality that we were talking about with Fulci, where it just seems to exist in this other, kind of ethos because, because it has that heavy disconnect. Yeah, and Udo Kier's character.
That scene's just so funny because it's Udo's, when you're seeing him sound just perfectly English, it's always a little weird.
But my question was more broadly, I guess, in a lot of his movies, it wasn't as obvious in this one, but like the blood in a lot of his movies is like a really weird sort of bright red. Sometimes it's almost like really thick, like paint.
Yep.
And I was just curious if that was like common giallo style, like the black gloves, or is that like purely Argento, or was it just Italian filmmaking in general?
That is something that I consider to be kind of Argento. And I think that had a lot to do with the production design and kind of the hyper stylized tone that he was going for. Because I mean, when you look at it, it is so thick. At times it's almost like viscous, like it looks like poster
especially
paint.
in deep red, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But Herschel Gordon-Lewis has some of that quality to some of that paint. I think sometimes it's the film stocks too, the way their certain colors are popping more than others in later film stocks. I think blood is I know you've done a lot of effects stuff, and documentaries and stuff, but the use of blood seems the consistency's changed every, decade or so, it seems.
Yeah, I actually did an entire study on blood for one of our other podcasts where I like kind of documented like the history of it and everything. But I do have to say, like, I feel like with Argento, it is very much like a color control. Like we were seeing a lot of this around the same time period. Like Herschel Gordon-Lewis wanted the blood to be the selling point of the movie. So he did everything he could, both on set and in post, to make sure that what did you see more than anything else on screen was that blood. And that's why we end up with titles like Color Me Blood Red and things like that. Like he wanted that to be the central focus of his movies. With Argento, there's something a little bit different going on where the blood, it's thick. It's got a texture to it. It's sticky. Especially like in Suspiria, when you think like that fake beating heart at the beginning of Suspiria, the blood that's coming out, it's actually like creating little air bubbles. And I have a feeling that if he was aiming for realism, he could have said, we need to kind of milk it down a little bit. Like it's way too thick, or it's orange, like it's practically orange in Suspiria. And so what I've always found fascinating is you would think that how fake the blood looks in the opening scene of Suspiria, that it would actually cause some type of audience disconnect, somewhat like you do with a Herschel Gordon-Lewis film, where as you're watching it, when somebody's getting their arm lopped off, you kind of just smile, like there's no cringe factor to it. It's not scary. But somehow in the opening scene of Suspiria, like as I mentioned, when Phil was asking his question, I always show the first 20 minutes of Suspiria in our intro graduate class at USC, in our, what we call our 507, our intro graduate production class. I always show the first 20 minutes of Suspiria just because it's a really great way to start looking at all the elements of filmmaking, because it beats you over the head with most of them. And I actually had a student pass out a couple of years ago because she said that the blood was too intense. And I had to call campus security, and it was crazy. But yeah, she was fine. She was fine. She just wasn't used to it. But I always approach it as, this is not realism. There's no way that you could associate it with realism, because even that beating heart doesn't look that real. And
they're not all of us are quite as, but you're right. That's an interesting study, looking at artifice in that film, because you're right. The beating of that stuff is just so overtly not real, but it works for that dreamy film. Whereas Tenebrae or something, even though the blood is squirting a lot, the color is a lot darker. It's quite different by the time it gets to Tenebrae, but that's also a decade, 15 years later. So a lot of things shift, but yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I think blood consistency, it's funny. And I think with the further we get away from it, the more we notice it now, that if it's not screen realistic blood, which is kind of what we expect from movies, modern movies.
Yeah, we've gotten progressively darker over the time because we've kind of become aware of it. And you know how we want it to look screen realistic now. In some regards, some people don't if you're watching specific films. But yeah, I'm fascinated by the study of blood on screen. One day I will find a couple of months and write a whole book. But yeah, it's definitely something that I'm fascinated by. So good question.
All right. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Ian.
Ian.
All right, let's do one last live one. We have Elise.
Oh, hi, Miss. It's Alice.
Alice, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm from San Francisco, California. So like I live in the Bay Area.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
The best movie. I always think the movies shot in San Francisco are the best location and for shooting
Yeah.
movies. I love it.
So I never seen like what's the name? Is it Polly like
Giallo or
Giallo? Yeah. So
yeah.
when I think of Giallo, like I never seen Giallo before. So like, and I didn't get a chance to see the movie because I had a class. And so, do you think Giallo is like similar to film noir, or because I mentioned on the chat, like I was asking about the chat about Quentin Tarantino films, like are they considered like, is Tarantino considered as like Giallo, or is it more like?
So
Well,
Tarantino,
there is one that you would consider. I think Death Proof has elements of the Giallo.
Death Proof references.
But-
so yeah, Tarantino, he pulls from Giallo. Like Tarantino,
the aesthetics for sure.
Definitely pulls aesthetics. He is not a Giallo filmmaker by any capacity, but he pulls. And that said, you asked about film noir. Giallo pulls from film noir because if we look, even going back to the very beginnings of Giallo with The Girl Who Knew Too Much, that is pulling from film noir. So everything is all interpolated together throughout all of film history. So film noir influenced stuff globally. And then from there, but I mean, film noir was influenced by German films, German expressionism. So it's all kind of going to play into each other. And then giallos become slashers in America and other things in other parts of the world. Like somebody reminded me here that Hong Kong actually had their own like little giallo sector with the Cat 3 films. So yeah, which I think you've been watching some of those, right, Elric?
They're really crazy. But I would say one of the directors we mentioned, producers rather, we mentioned at the start that Argento was influenced by was somebody called Val Luden. And if you look up that work, you'll start to see, especially something like Seventh Victim has a lot of similarities.
See, I should have worn my Seventh Victim shirt tonight.
I know, I was trying, but some of them they're a little different than other film noirs around them. They have a different quality. That the darkness isn't just about black and white crime versus good. There's something else going on, something more mysterious, a little bit more of a spell, which is a lot more like these films, I think.
And I say Seventh Victim is a really good example of kind of like how a giallo film kind of bleeds into what's going to come later.
Double feature that with All the Colors of the Dark. It's like,
oh my God, that's like crazy cult wildness. I love it. I love it.
That would be a great one, yeah.
And even some of the cinematography of the giallo films, you can see the influence from the film noirs. If you watch something like The Spiral Staircase and then pop in something like Tenebrae, you're going to see where kind of the cinematographers are all watching each other's stuff. You're always watching the prior generation, and that becomes kind of your kicking point to move forward with your own stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So, fantastic. Thank you so much, Alice.
Thank you. Because coming from San Francisco, like San Francisco is very known for like film noir. Like one of the famous movies I've seen is called The Birds, and it was shot in San Francisco. So, and also there's like similar to giallo. I saw this in my film class, and it was like a killer. I forget the name of the title, but like it was shot in San Francisco by the Golden Gate Bridge. So there's very famous like old film.
Vertigo, maybe? It could have been
Vertigo is near Golden Gate.
Or Bullet or something. There's one that I would recommend you. So somebody will laugh if they know it, but it's a really good San Francisco one that kind of has noir and kind of has giallo. It's called Shattered. and
Oh,
it's from the 90s, and it's all shot up there, and it's awesome.
That's a glossy thriller from the 90s.
But it has got elements of all of these, and
It
it's a lot of
does. It
fun,
really
you know?
does. Yeah. So in the 90s, we see all of these. By that time, we see giallos come over stateside with like De Palma stuff in the 80s. By the 90s, all of Hollywood kind of embraces that style of De Palma-ish thriller. And we go crazy big, really expensive, and really sleazy with it. And that's where we.
Okay, I've got it. Everyone asked what I had double Bird with the Crystal Plumage. Basic Instinct. Think about it. Think about it. The killer, what the killer does, and why.
Oh my God, there we go.
That's actually, that'd be a fun double.
And it
now I
feels
want to
like
watch
it's
Basic
coming
Instinct.
full circle because it really is kind of going from like the root of it, like at its infancy, to, you know, Hollywood throwing millions upon millions of dollars and, you know,
Big movie, yeah.
sexy movie stars at it. So yeah, that's an interesting double.
And San Francisco.
And San Francisco. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Alice.
Do you think Vertigo, like, is a movie like Vertigo was filmed in San Francisco? Do you feel like Vertigo is similar to like giallo, or is it more like a film noir?
Well, Vertigo is Hitchcock, and
Uh,
But I think it's coming from noir, and I think
Mhm.
giallo is borrowing from it.
Yeah.
So it's somewhere, yeah. I think it's somewhere in between,
Yeah.
sandwiched, you know.
And Argento said that, you know, he was heavily influenced from the Hitchcock. So he would have seen Vertigo, you know, going into stuff like this.
Especially the part to answer a previous guest, they were talking about unreliable narrators. And
That's
that
Vertigo.
has one of the biggest of those kind of switches from viewpoints. So
We argue about that film.
it's my favorite film.
It's K. It's great. I mean, it's great. It's well shot. I have
I love
problems
Berg.
watching it.
Thanks, Alice.
Thanks, Alice. So to quick fire some of the ones in the chat, I saw somebody ask where they can take classes on horror.
Mhm.
And that's a phenomenal question. So there's a lot of different universities offer horror classes. I teach one every summer at USC, which is not limited to USC students. Like anybody can take it. I actually see some of my old students in there as well. Hey, Gabe, how you doing? And so it's the one that I do at USC. It's like 6 weeks. Super intensive. We meet like 3 times a week, like 3 to 4 hours every time. And we do like a super deep dive into horror history, contemporary horror markets. And usually by the end of the summer, most of the students have made short films as well. But that said, if you don't want to enroll in like a full university or program, and USC is by no means the only place, a lot of universities have horror classes. It's gotten, even just since I started my graduate career, it was very unknown at the time. This is like 15 years ago. Not all universities had horror programs at the time. And a lot of universities didn't call it horror. They called it paracinema. Which is like we don't want to use the H word term in academia. Oh, it's paracinema. And most universities now kind of embrace it a little bit more than they used to. But that said, there's other places. The Miskatonic Institute is a phenomenal place online. They have lecture series that they do all over the US. And right now, one of the good things of the pandemic is all the Miskatonic Institute lectures have gone online. And so they're literally doing like one a week that you can watch. Even just last night, I watched a 3-hour-long lecture on Itagawa. Thank you. Itagawa Rampo, and all of the Rampo films that came out of his work. And again, just a really niche sector of horror, a Japanese writer who ended up being fuel for all of these amazing films. But yeah, they do just amazing lectures. There's one that I'm seeing next week on American voodoo films through Miskatonic Institute.
Yo, you don't need school, just podcasts, yo.
Just podcasts. Listen to Colors of the
free.
Dark.
Free education right there. You don't need to pay anything, you know?
Yeah. So Colors of the Dark, we obviously...
There's lots of good ones.
Yeah, there's plenty. Faculty of Horror is a really good one.
For Giallo, Fragments of Fear is doing really good stuff, really in depth. Rachel Nisbet's like she knows all the production design history of all those films. And there's plenty of different angles to these kinds of things. Yeah. So you can cobble together free. What I'm saying is not to disregard university sides of it, because both of us work for university, but it's more there is a lot of free ways to get that first grounding.
Yeah, there are podcasts that I love listening to just because they school the shit out of me. Like everyone has an expertise. And so like Elric and I are constantly consuming media as well, because there is no end to horror education. And that's part of the reason that I love it. I'm always on the hunt for more.
While you guys are looking through the questions, there was one thrown out to Bret.
Yeah.
And sorry, I just need to find it again. Any cool films coming from Arrow or Agfa you can tell us about? And I'm going to couple that with a question earlier about if the Arrow release of Bird with the Crystal Plumage is a good buy.
Yeah, I do think it's a good buy because the restoration is an early one from Arrow, and it really typifies how high quality their work is and the kind of subjects that they tackle. As far as Agfa stuff in the future, I don't know. We have so many movies. I'm not sure which ones are like good to talk about yet, but yeah, in a second. I'm just trying to think of like just recent Arrow discs that I know are just super great are the, if there are any copies left, the Shinya Tsukamoto box set. He's the guy who did
gorgeous.
Tetsuo the Iron Man and Bullet Ballet and Kotoko and a variety of wild ass Japanese movies, and that's my highest recommendation of anything they put out in the last several months. Aside from the obvious ones like I know they did a disc of RoboCop that's pretty great. You know,
there's a big one today because I have one of my favorite memories is I didn't even have region free player, and Elijah Drenner had done the German Switchblade Sisters, and he had his last copy, and he charged me $50 in a parking alley for his last copy, and I was like, wait, this is my last $50, and he wouldn't do it cheaper. And then today they announced that they're finally putting it. So all those things, and it is such a great movie.
That is so long overdue. Oh my gosh.
And Jack Hill. So I was really actually happy to see that finally and all those extra features he made for the German will be on that. So I was like, okay, that's cool.
I love back alley Switchblade Sister DVD deals going down in Hollywood.
I only pay for it because I was like, it's never going to come to Blue.
It's never going anywhere. So I saw a bunch of questions about what we're going to do for future films. I don't know. Can we do Society? Is that one available? I don't think it's available.
We've already done it live.
I know that was epic though. We screened for those.
I don't repeat.
Oh, okay. We can't repeat. I'm seeing a lot of requests for like Dead Alive, which I feel, did we do a live screening of Dead Alive?
We did. I mean, you watched it at my school.
Oh, that was it. We showed it in a class. Okay,
I would do Meet the Feebles because
if that was available.
That one, there's so much to talk about.
I feel like that's one where like we have to do every trigger warning ahead of time. I'm like, okay, this is racist.
Oh, with puppets.
It's rapey. It's got drugs. It's just wrong. There's puppets. Yeah.
Yes. No, but it's something, you know, that I don't think that's probably, I assume that's not available at all, but Bret would probably know because I know Peter Jackson, I think, owns his own rights to those early ones.
Sadly, those have been out of circulation for years. He's been threatening to restore them. Yeah. I don't know what the holdup is. It doesn't take that much work to restore them.
I know. Yeah, I know. I heard recently that he had done it, but just hadn't put them out. So who the heck knows? But we'll promise that if that ever is available, I would be all about it. But we'll find something off the wall for the next one.
We were going to do Perdita Durango.
Oh, you're right. We did talk about Perdita Durango.
Well, yeah,
which is another one where I feel like
trigger warning.
That's a lot.
I don't want to have some of those post conversations myself.
That's a lot of trigger warnings. I mean, that is
maybe if you want to. I like that movie a lot, but
I'm on the upcoming Blu-ray as a talking head, talking about how fucking bonkers that movie is. But that is one where it's like inficide, at least 4 rape scenes, but yet it's a comedy, and so yeah, that's like a really
it's not rape in the way where you can get like it's just implied and you move on. It is like you're gonna feel what you have to watch in that film. It's
and Rosie
Javier
Perez,
Bardem is very intense in that film.
Rosie Perez is the rapist in one of the scenes.
Yeah, but I'm not saying I wouldn't. It just
not that makes it
might not
any
be a
less,
fun time out, but you know.
Yeah,
James Gandolfini's in it.
That man gets hit by like 6 cars and run over by one, and still is standing in that movie. Like
that's James Gandolfini.
You just cannot knock him down in that film. But I will definitely plug that one is coming out from Severin, and I'm one of the talking heads on it. So you should definitely check it out anyway. So yeah, but we'll come up with something absolutely bonkers and amazing for that. So yeah, let's see here. Any other questions that we can quick answer? Let's see here.
Other recommended directors besides Martino, Fulci, Lenzi, and Argento.
Who did,
Yes.
I don't know any of his other work, but I will say House with the Laughing Windows, which Elric's wearing the shirt
Poopy,
from.
yeah, Poopy.
Poopy
Poopy
Avati.
Avati.
Yeah. Is definitely,
But I don't know if
enjoyed.
he has a lot of others. Like I watched one Zeter, which was interesting, but didn't quite work
Is that
for
the
me.
zombie one?
Yeah, kind of. It's like, yeah, it ends with a weird zombie. It's got a really interesting kind of hook to it, but that's strange. I'm just trying to find the name of the guy I was just talking about.
Yeah.
Someone put in Corbucci, but I feel like Corbucci was far more into
Western.
westerns and things like that. I mean, Corbucci worked in a lot of genres, but I can't think of much that's actually giallo.
And I do have to say, I have, it's my one oversight in giallo films so far that I really have to fix. The Death Walks films. I have not seen many of the Death Walks films. So those are ones that I have a heavy oversight that I've had sitting on my shelf for like a month trying to find time to watch them. But those are ones that I'm not familiar with, but there are definitely some pretty popular giallos in there. Like there's a couple of them, the Death Walks films.
Yeah, the person, well, actually, okay, there's just one name that I have to mention is Aldo Ledo, because he actually is the assistant director of Bird with the Crystal Plumage, but then he went on to make Night Train Murders and a number of other really good giallo. But the person is Luigi Bazzoni. This is a good plug for Arrow as well. One of the best things I saw a couple years ago was when they released The Possessed, which was just a fascinating, original, part giallo, part something regional, rural horror. And then they also did Footprints on the Moon and The Fifth Chord, which I think is another one of the best shot giallos. I mean, Becca always kind of talk about as like the best looking. Also by the same DP as the film we watched today. So this guy just made those three, and I think that's a great little trilogy there. So, and if you're interested in seeing something just really original from Arrow, The Possessed, I can't recommend it enough. I knew nothing about it when I watched it, and it's just a guy coming to a small kind of village town, and slowly this mystery opening up around him. It's I know I found it hard to categorize, but I really liked it.
Awesome. Yay. We've had a request for Gates of Hell trilogy.
Brett, is that in the catalog?
Did we lose Brett?
Not the catalog, but can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not in the catalog, but I'm sure maybe we'll figure it out.
We could do a House by the Cemetery Bob along, where anytime Bob talks, we dub for him. Like we dub him over and we scream his lines, so we don't have to hear that woman's voice ever again.
Excellent. Wow.
All right, guys. There have been so many questions. They're still coming in, but it is getting late. So wait, Johnny Depp signs every autograph before. Sam Raimi, when he came to campus, he did like a full hour and a half with us, and then there was a line of students, and he talked to them for like 4 hours.
Yeah, no, and Romero always did that too. Romero would stay till the lights were out, and every person got signed or a handshake. And so, if anyone has anything, I mean, we could always ask if anyone wanted to raise their hand and ask. Some of these might be expired questions. I don't know.
And you can also, by the way, Crispin Glover does the same things. If you've ever been to Crispin Glover's talks, they go to like 2 a.m. because dude signs everything. But yeah, you can also, you can find Colors of the Dark on socials. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we are happy to answer questions there as well. And next week's show, I don't think we're covering giallos. I think
we're going to Kingcast crossover.
We're going into Stephen King. So,
they're coming, and we'll do other stuff too. A little bit of woman in horror appreciation.
Yeah, we're doing some women in horror stuff, and we're trying. I'm excited for our assignment this week of I've got to revisit all my King watches.
Oh, that's right.
Should be fun.
You guys watching The Stand?
Not yet. I'm excited to, because we have some friends who were producers on it.
But it's on a weird channel, right? CBS Access. Well, I've never been able to get on that thing. I don't know what it is.
It's free.
Yeah, no,
I think it's free, isn't it?
No, you have to pay for it. You go through Amazon.
Oh shit, that's why. Okay, I was thinking it's the same one that I watched Twilight Zone on, and that is Peacock.
If it's not on Code Red Bill's site, I don't even know what it is. Like that's all I do. It's all I can do.
No, right now I have to say the one TV show that I am loving right now that I would recommend is by the director of Perdita Durango, Alex D'Iglesia. 30 Coins on HBO Max is fucking awesome. So I highly recommend, if you have not been watching 30 Coins, it's the horror bonkersness, crazy monsters, what the fuck is going on that I needed right now.
It's so fun. It's really good.
It's been a blast.
When does Perdita come out? Is it just, do we know?
I will check. Yeah.
Late March.
Late March.
Oh,
Okay.
Late March. Okay.
So Alex, I'll make this. If they'll give it to us early to show, end of February, hey, then we've got a draw. So,
A lot of disclaimers with that one, but at the same time, it's you will never see anything like Perdita Durango ever again. Nothing like that will ever be made ever again. That someone throws that much money at something quite like that. So yeah, it's a fascinating film in that capacity. It's Hollywood's exploitation, crazy rape, infanticide comedy movie.
And good for the Lynch fans, and like the good connector with Barry Gifford and Sailor and Lulu and all that. So it's
who is interviewed on the DVD, the Blu-ray.
Oh, cool. Oh.
I believe they got a Barry Gifford in there. So yeah.
Well, thank you. 108 people actually stayed to the very
so
end.
Much. I know we what did one of our listeners said this week? Joyful blathering.
No, every time that for the last 4 years they'll go up to me and go blathering. They love it. But I always thought it was negative at the start, but it turns out it was a positive thing. So.
Yeah, we get it as a positive, so we'll take it. So thank you guys so much for sticking with us for all this. And correction, Grease 2. Grease sucks. This is Grease 2. Grease 2 rules.
Also, most of my posters are there. They're all over there. Yeah, I'm in the wrong.
Yours are all fancy.
They're all Hitchcock. This is a Hitchcock room. So I don't know why.
But by the way, Elric, in my double feature of the day, besides with the Crystal Plumage, I finally watched Night of a Thousand Cats, and they actually sort of work.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
They're both about caged cats to some extent.
You're right. Yeah, that scene. Yeah, for sure. That could have been Hugo Stiglitz in that scene. That would have been amazing. Actually, I love that. That's a good double. Nicely done. Well played. And for people who don't watch, did you watch it online? Or I always tell people not to watch the Amazon version because I don't know if it's the same as the disc version.
I bought it on DVD, but It's really low quality, and it's also only an hour and 7 minutes.
That's the perfect cut.
Oh yeah.
You don't want a minute over 67. But it's interesting, right? I'm not wrong. It's actually kind of an amazing. You've never seen anything quite like that film.
Yeah, I mean, especially the economy. Anytime you see a shot of the cats, someone's just been murdered.
Yeah,
pretty much. And I love how. Sorry, this is a tangent, but I love how they cut to his face in the helicopter 30 times in the movie, and it's just the same shot.
Yeah.
Him with the glasses.
Oh, yeah. He's
amazing.
my James Bond.
Amazing.
You know what I find interesting is we've shifted to a completely different topic about Night of a Thousand Cats, and only 3 people went away.
I think we start the podcast now. Hit record. This is going to be a more interesting part of the show. Is the after hours. I always think whenever it gets weird, it gets better.
Yeah, that's what Elric and ours Patreon show is, because usually that one we do later at night. It's on the weekend. Usually we're in pajamas and it's a lot less prepared and it gets weird.
Well, the nice thing about anything called Patreon, if somebody's paying to be there, then I figure you can give them anything you want versus somebody who's out in the public. So if you're interested in this getting a little crazier.
Little bonkers. Go Patreon. So excellent. And we're cheap dates on that. It's only a couple bucks. So
yeah, that's true.
Anyways, thank you guys so much. My dog has been barking at me for 10 minutes, so I apologize for that. So I have to go let her out.
I thought that was your bladder.
Probably is. Just do something. So thank you guys so much. Have a good one, everybody.
Good to see you again, Bret.
Yeah, lovely to see all 3 of you.
We'll see you again. And thanks for hosting it, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
You too.